Chapter 11. A Small Incident. Failing a gentleman friend, Mr. Bevan was obliged to do what he could by means of local talent. On Sheen's next visit he was introduced to a burly youth of his own age, very taciturn and apparently ferocious. He, it seemed, was the knife and boot boy at the Blue Boar, did a bit with the gloves, and was willing to spar with Sheen provided Mr. Bevan made it all right with the governor. Saw, that is to say, that he did not get into trouble for passing in unprofessional frivolity moments which should have been sacred to knives and boots. These terms having been agreed to, he put on the gloves. For the first time since he had begun his lessons, Sheen experienced an attack of his old shyness and dislike of hurting other people's feelings. He could not resist the thought that he had no grudge against the warden of the knives and boots. He hardly liked to hit him. The other, however, did not share this prejudice. He rushed at Sheen with such determination that almost the first warning the latter had that the contest had begun was the collision of the back of his head with the wall. Out in the middle of the room he did better, and was beginning to hold his own, in spite of a rousing thump on his left eye, when Joe Bevan called, "Time!" A second round went off in much the same way. His guard was more often in the right place, and his leads less wild. At the conclusion of the round, pressure of business forced his opponent to depart, and Sheen wound up his lesson with a couple of minutes at the punching ball. On the whole, he was pleased with his first spar with someone who was really doing his best and trying to hurt him. With Joe Bevan and Francis there was always the feeling that they were playing down to him. Joe Bevan's gentle taps, in particular, were a little humiliating. But with his late opponent all had been serious. It had been a real test, and he had come through it very fairly. On the whole, he had taken more than he had given. His eye would look curious tomorrow. But already he had thought out a way of foiling the burly youth's rushes. Next time he would really show his true form. The morrow, on which Sheen expected his eye to look curious, was the day he had promised to play fives with Mr. Spence. He hoped that at the early hour at which they had arranged to play, it would not have reached its worst stage, but when he looked in the glass at 6:45, he beheld a small ridge of purple beneath it. It was not large, nor did it interfere with his sight, but it was very visible. Mr. Spence, however, was a sportsman, and had boxed himself in his time, so there was a chance that nothing would be said. It was a raw, drizzly morning. There would probably be few fives players before breakfast, and the capture of the second court should be easy. So it turned out. Nobody was about when Sheen arrived. He pinned his slip of paper to the door, and after waiting for a short while for Mr. Spence, and finding the process chilly, went for a trot round the gymnasium to pass the time. Mr. Spence had not arrived during his absence, but somebody else had. At the door of the second court, gleaming in first 15 blazer, sweater, stockings, and honor cap, stood Attell. Sheen looked at Attell, and Attell looked through Sheen. It was curious, thought Sheen, that Attell should be standing in the very doorway of Court 2. It seemed to suggest that he claimed some sort of ownership. On the other hand, there was Sheen's paper on the... His eye happened to light on the cement flooring in front of the court. There was a crumpled ball of paper there. When he had started for his run, there had been no such ball of paper. Sheen picked it up and straightened it out. On it was written R. D. Sheen. He looked up quickly. In addition to the far-away look, Attell's face now wore a faint smile, as if he had seen something rather funny on the horizon, but he spake no word. A curiously calm and contented feeling came upon Sheen. Here was something definite at last. He could do nothing, however much he might resent it when fellows passed him by as if he did not exist. But when it came to removing his landmark— "Would you mind shifting a bit?" he said, very politely. "I want to pin my paper on the door again. It seems to have fallen down." Attle's gaze shifted slowly from the horizon and gradually embraced Sheen. "I've got this court," he said. "I think not," said Sheen silkily. "I was here at 7:10, and there was no paper on the door then, so I put mine up. If you move a little, I'll put it up again." "Go and find another court if you want to play," said Attle. "And if you've got anybody to play with," he added with a sneer, "this is mine." "I think not," said Sheen. Attle resumed his inspection of the horizon. "Attle," said Sheen. Attle did not answer. Sheen pushed him gently out of the way and tore down the paper from the door. Their eyes met. Attle, after a moment's pause, came forward, half menacing, half irresolute, and as he came Sheen hit him under the chin in the manner recommended by Mr. Bevan. "When you uppercut," Mr. Bevan was wont to say, "don't make it a swing. Just a half-arm jolt's all you want." It was certainly all Attle wanted. He was more than surprised. He was petrified. The sudden shock of the blow, coming as it did from so unexpected a quarter, deprived him of speech, which was, perhaps, fortunate for him, for what he would have said would hardly have commended itself to Mr. Spence, who came up at this moment. "Well, Sheen," said Mr. Spence, "here you are. I hope I haven't kept you waiting. What a morning! You've got the court, I hope?" "Yes, sir," said Sheen. He wondered if the master had seen the little episode which had taken place immediately before his arrival. Then he remembered that it had happened inside the court. It must have been over by the time Mr. Spence had come upon the scene. "Are you waiting for somebody, Attle?" asked Mr. Spence. "Stanning? He will be here directly. I passed him on the way." Attle left the court, and they began their game. "You've hurt your eye, Sheen," said Mr. Spence at the end of the first game. "How did that happen?" "Boxing, sir," said Sheen. "Oh," replied Mr. Spence, and to Sheen's relief he did not pursue his inquiries. Attle had wandered out across the gravel to meet Stanning. "Got that court?" inquired Stanning. "No." "You idiot! Why on earth didn't you? It's the only court worth playing in. Who's got it?" "Sheen." "Sheen!" Stanning stopped dead. "Do you mean to say you let a fool like Sheen take it from you? Why didn't you turn him out?" "I couldn't," said Attle. "I was just going to when Spence came up. He's playing Sheen this morning. I couldn't very well bag the court when a master wanted it." "I suppose not," said Stanning. "What did Sheen say when you told him you wanted the court?" This was getting near a phase of the subject which Attle was not eager to discuss. "Oh, he didn't say much," he said. "Did you do anything?" persisted Stanning. Attle suddenly remembered having noticed that Sheen was wearing a black eye. This was obviously a thing to be turned to account. "I hit him in the eye," he said. "I'll bet it's colored by school-time." And sure enough, when school-time arrived, there was Sheen with his face in the condition described, and Stanning hastened to spread abroad this sequel to the story of Sheen's failings in the town battle. By the end of preparation it had got about the school that Sheen had cheeked Attle, that Attle had hit Sheen, and that Sheen had been afraid to hit him back. At the precise moment when Sheen was in the middle of a warm 2-minute round with Francis at the Blue Boar, An indignation meeting was being held in the senior day room at Seymour's to discuss this latest disgrace to the house. "This is getting a bit too thick," was the general opinion. Moreover, it was universally agreed that something ought to be done. The feeling in the house against Sheen had been stirred to a dangerous pitch by this last episode. Seymour's thought more of their reputation than any house in the school. For years past the house had led on the cricket and football field, and off it. Sometimes other houses would actually win one of the cups, but when this happened, Seymour's was always their most dangerous rival. Other houses had their ups and downs, were very good one year and very bad the next, but Seymour's had always managed to maintain a steady level of excellence. It always had a man or two in the school 11 and 15, generally supplied one of the school rackets pair for Queen's Club in the Easter vacation, and when this did not happen always had one of two of the gymnasium 6 or shooting 8, or a few men who had won scholarships at the varsities. The pride of a house is almost keener than the pride of a school. From the first minute he entered the house a new boy was made to feel that, in coming to Seymour's, he had accepted a responsibility that his reputation was not his own, but belonged to the house. If he did well, the glory would be Seymour's glory. If he did badly, he would be sinning against the house. This second story about Sheen, therefore, stirred Seymour's to the extent of giving the house a resemblance to a hornet's nest into which a stone had been hurled. After school that day the house literally hummed. The noise of the 2 day rooms talking it over could be heard in the road outside. The only bar that stood between the outraged Seymourites and Sheen was Drummond. As had happened before, Drummond resolutely refused to allow anything in the shape of an active protest, and no argument would draw him from this unreasonable attitude, though why it was that he had taken it up he himself could not have said. Perhaps it was that rooted hatred a boxer instinctively acquires of anything in the shape of unfair play that influenced him. He revolted against the idea of a whole house banding together against one of its members. So even this fresh provocation did not result in any active interference with Sheen, but it was decided that he must be cut even more thoroughly than before. And about the time when this was resolved, Sheen was receiving the congratulations of Francis on having positively landed a blow upon him. It was an event which marked an epoch in his career. End of chapter 11. Chapter 12. Dunstable and Linton go up the river. There are some proud, spirited natures which resent rules and laws on principle as attempts to interfere with the rights of the citizen. As the Duchess in the play said of her son, who had had unpleasantness with the authorities at Eton because they had been trying to teach him things, "Silwood is a sweet boy, but he will not stand the bearing rein." Dunstable was also a sweet boy, but he too objected to the bearing rein. And Linton was a sweet boy, and he had similar prejudices. And this placing of the town out of bounds struck both of them simultaneously as a distinct attempt on the part of the headmaster to apply the bearing rein. "It's all very well to put it out of bounds for the kids," said Dunstable firmly, "but when it comes to us, why, I never heard of such a thing." Linton gave it as his opinion that such conduct was quite in a class of its own, as regarded cool cheek. "It fairly sneaks," said Linton, with forced calm. "They're Garibaldi." "Kids," proceeded Dunstable judicially, "are idiots, and can't be expected to behave themselves downtown. Put the show out of bounds to them if you like, but we, echoed Linton. The fact is, said Dunstable, it's a beastly nuisance, but we shall have to go downtown and up the river just to assert ourselves. We can't have the thin end of the wedge coming and spoiling our liberties. We may as well chuck life altogether if we aren't able to go to the town whenever we like. And Albert will be pining away, added Linton. "Hello, young gentleman," said the town boatman, when they presented themselves to him. "What can I do for you?" "I know it seems strange," said Dunstable, "but we want a boat. We are the downtrodden British Schoolboys' League for Demanding Liberty, and seeing that we get it. Have you a boat?" The man said he believed he had a boat. In fact, now that he came to think of it, he rather fancied he had one or two. He proceeded to get one ready, and the two martyrs to the cause stepped in. Dunstable settled himself in the stern and collected the rudder lines. "Hullo," said Linton, "aren't you going to row?" "It may be only my foolish fancy," replied Dunstable, "but I rather think you're going to do that. I'll steer." "Beastly slacker," said Linton. "Anyhow, how far are we going? I'm not going to pull all night." "If you row for about half an hour without exerting yourself, and I can trust you not to do that, and then look to your left, you'll see a certain hostelry, if it hasn't moved since I was last there. It's called the Blue Boar. We will have tea there, and then I'll pull gently back, and that will end the programme." "Except being caught in the town by half the masters," said Linton. "Still, I'm not grumbling. This had to be done. Ready?" "Not just yet," said Dunstable, looking past Linton and up the landing stage. "Wait just 1 second. Here are some friends of ours." Linton looked over his shoulder. "Albert!" he cried. "And the who struck me divers blows in sundry places. Ah, they've sighted us." "What are you going to do? We can't have another scrap with them." "Far from it," said Dunstable gently. "Hullo, Albert! And my friend in the moth-eaten bowler. This is well met." "You come out here," said Albert, pausing on the brink. "Why?" asked Dunstable. "You see what you'll get." "But we don't want to see what we'll get. You've got such a narrow mind, Albert. May I call you Bertie? You seem to think that nobody has any pleasures except vulgar brawls. We are going to row up river and think beautiful thoughts." Albert was measuring with his eye the distance between the boat and landing stage. It was not far. A sudden spring. "If you want a fight, go up to the school and ask for Mr. Drummond. He's the gentleman who sent you to hospital last time. Any time you're passing, I'm sure he'd—" Albert leaped. But Linton had had him under observation, and, as he sprung, pushed vigorously with his oar. The gap between boat and shore widened in an instant, and Albert, failing to obtain a foothold on the boat, fell back with a splash that sent a cascade over his friend and the boatman into 3 feet of muddy water. By the time he had scrambled out, his enemies were moving pensively upstream. The boatman was annoyed. "Making me wet and spoiling my paint. What yer mean by it?" "Me and my friend here, we want a boat," said Albert, ignoring the main issue. "Want a boat? Then you'll not get a boat. Spoil my cushions too, would you? What next, I wonder? You go to Smith and ask him for a boat. Perhaps he ain't so particular about having his cushions." "All right," said Albert. "All right." Mr. Smith proved more complacent, and a quarter of an hour after Dunstable and Linton had disappeared, Albert and his friend were on the water. Moist outside, Albert burned with a desire for revenge. He meant to follow his men till he found them. It almost seemed as if there would be a repetition of the naval battle which had caused the town to be put out of bounds. Albert was a quick-tempered youth, and he had swallowed fully a pint of Severn water. Dunstable and Linton sat for some time in the oak parlour of the Blue Boar. It was late when they went out. As they reached the water's edge, Linton uttered a cry of consternation. "What's up?" asked Dunstable. "I wish you wouldn't do that so suddenly. It gives me a start. Do you feel bad?" "Great Scott! It's gone!" "The pain?" "Our boat! I tied it up to this post." "You can't have done. What's that boat over there? That looks like ours." "No, it isn't. That was there when we came. I noticed it. I tied ours up here, to this post." "This is a shade awkward," said Dunstable thoughtfully. "You must have tied it up jolly rottenly. It must have slipped away and gone downstream. This is where we find ourselves in the cart, right among the Ribstons, by Jove. I feel like that Frenchman in the story who lost his glasses just as he got to the top of the mountain and missed the view. Altogether I do not wish I had come." "I'm certain I tied it up all right. And, why, look! Here's the rope still on the pole, just as I left it." For the first time Dunstable seemed interested. "This is getting mysterious. Did we hire a rowing boat, or a submarine? There's something on the end of this rope. Give it a tug and see. There! Didn't you feel it?" "I do believe," said Linton in an awed voice, "the thing's sunk." They pulled at the rope together. The waters heaved and broke, and up came the nose of the boat, to sink back with a splash as they loosened their hold. "There are more things in heaven and earth," said Dunstable, wiping his hands. "If you ask me, I should say an enemy hath done this. A boat doesn't sink of its own accord." "Albert," said Linton, "the blackguard must have followed us up, and done it while we were at tea." "That's about it," said Dunstable. "And now, how about getting home?" "I suppose we'd better walk. We shall be hours late for lock-up." "You," said Dunstable, "may walk if you are fond of exercise and aren't in a hurry. Personally, I'm going back by river." "But—" "That looks like a good enough boat over there. Anyhow, we must make it do. One mustn't be particular for once." "But it belongs— What will the other fellow do?" "I can't help his troubles," said Dunstable mildly. "Having enough of my own. Coming?" It was about 10 minutes later that Sheen, approaching the waterside in quest of his boat, found no boat there. The time was 6:15, and lock-up was at 6:30. End of chapter 12. Chapter 13. Deus Ex Machina. It did not occur to Sheen immediately that his boat had actually gone. The full beauty of the situation was some moments in coming home to him. At first he merely thought that somebody had moved it to another part of the bank, as the authorities at the inn had done once or twice in the past, to make room for the boats of fresh visitors. Walking along the lawn in search of it, he came upon the stake to which Dunstable's submerged craft was attached. He gave the rope a tentative pull, and was surprised to find that there was a heavy drag on the end of it. Then suddenly the truth flashed across him. "Heavens!" he cried. "It's sunk!" Joe Bevan and other allies lent their aid to the pulling. The lost boat came out of the river like some huge fish, and finally rested on the bank, oozing water and drenching the grass in all directions. Joe Bevan stooped down and examined it in the dim light. "What happened here, sir," he said, "is that there's a plank gone from the bottom. Smashed clean out it is. Not started it isn't. Smashed clean out. That's what it is. Someone must have been here and done it." Sheen looked at the boat and saw that he was right. A plank in the middle had been splintered. It looked as if somebody had driven some heavy instrument into it. As a matter of fact, Albert had effected the job with the butt end of an oar. The damage was not ruinous. A carpenter could put the thing right at no great expense, but it would take time, and meanwhile the minutes were flying, and lock-up was now little more than half an hour away. "What'll you do, sir?" asked Bevan. That was just what Sheen was asking himself. What could he do? The road to the school twisted and turned to such an extent that, though the distance from the Blue Boar to Seymour's was only a couple of miles as the crow flies, he would have to cover double that distance unless he took a short cut across the fields. And if he took a short cut in the dark, he was certain to lose himself. It was a choice of evils. The Blue Boar possessed but one horse and trap, and he had seen that driven away to the station in charge of a fisherman's luggage half an hour before. "I shall have to walk," he said. "It's a long way. You'll be late, won't you?" said Mr. Bevan. "It can't be helped. I suppose I shall. I wonder who smashed that boat," he added after a pause. Passing through the inn on his way to the road, he made inquiries. It appeared that two young gentlemen from the school had been there to tea. They had arrived in a boat and gone away in a boat. Nobody else had come into the inn. Suspicion obviously rested upon them. "Do you remember anything about them?" asked Sheen. Further details came out. One of the pair had worn a cap like Sheen's. The other's headgear, minutely described, showed him that its owner was a member of the school's second 11. Sheen pursued the inquiry. He would be so late in any case that a minute or so more or less would make no material difference, and he was very anxious to find out, if possible, who it was that had placed him in this difficulty. He knew that he was unpopular in the school, but he had not looked for this sort of thing. Then somebody suddenly remembered having heard one of the pair address the other by name. "What name?" asked Sheen. His informant was not sure. Would it be Linton? "Linton," said Sheen. That was it. Sheen thanked him and departed, still puzzled. Linton, as he knew him, was not the sort of fellow to do a thing like that. And the other, the second 11 man, must be Dunstable. They were always about together. He did not know much about Dunstable, but he could hardly believe that this sort of thing was his form either. Well, he would have to think of that later. He must concentrate himself now on covering the distance to the school in the minimum of time. He looked at his watch. 20 minutes more. If he hurried, he might not be so very late. He wished that somebody would come by in a cart and give him a lift. He stopped and listened. No sound of horse's hoof broke the silence. He walked on again. Then, faint at first, but growing stronger every instant, there came from some point in the road far behind him a steady droning sound. He almost shouted with joy. A motor! Even now he might do it. But could he stop it? Would the motors pay any attention to him, or would he flash past and leave him in the dust? From the rate at which the drone increased, the car seemed to be travelling at a rare speed. He moved to one side of the road and waited. He could see the lights now flying towards him. Then, as the car hummed past, he recognized its driver and put all he knew into a shout. "Bruce!" he cried. For a moment it seemed as if he had not been heard. The driver paid not the smallest attention as far as he could see. He looked neither to the left nor to the right. Then the car slowed down and, backing, came slowly to where he stood. "Hullo!" said the driver. "Who's that?" Jack Bruce was alone in the car, muffled to the eyes in an overcoat. It was more by his general appearance than his face that Sheen had recognized him. "It's me, Sheen. I say, Bruce, I wish you'd give me a lift to Seymour's, will you?" There was never any waste of words about Jack Bruce. Of all the 634 boys at Wrykyn, he was probably the only one whose next remark in such circumstances would not have been a question. Bruce seldom asked questions, never if they wasted time. "Hop in," he said. Sheen consulted his watch again. "Lock-up's in a quarter of an hour," he said, "but they give us 10 minutes grace. That allows us plenty of time, doesn't it?" "Do it in 7 minutes, if you like." "Don't hurry," said Sheen. "I've never been in a motor before, and I don't want to cut the experience short. It's awfully good of you to give me a lift." "That's all right," said Bruce. "Were you going anywhere? Am I taking you out of your way?" "No, I was just trying the car. It's a new one. The pater's just got it." "Do you do much of this?" said Sheen. "Good bit. I'm going in for the motor business when I leave school." "So all this is training?" "That's it." There was a pause. "You seem to be going at a good pace just now," said Sheen. "About 30 miles an hour. She can move all right." "That's faster than you're allowed to go, isn't it?" "Yes." "You've never been caught, have you?" "Not yet. I want to see how much pace I can get out of her, because she'll be useful when the election really comes on. Bringing voters to the poll, you know. That's why the pater bought this new car. It's a beauty. His other's only a little runabout." "Doesn't your father mind your motoring?" "Likes it," said Jack Bruce. It seemed to Sheen that it was about time that he volunteered some information about himself, instead of plying his companion with questions. It was pleasant talking to a Wrykynian again, and Jack Bruce had apparently either not heard of the Albert incident, or else he was not influenced by it in any way. "You've got me out of an awful hole, Bruce," he began. "That's all right. Been out for a walk?" "I'd been to the Blue Boar." "Oh," said Bruce. He did not seem to wish to know why Sheen had been there. Sheen proceeded to explain. "I suppose you've heard all about me," he said uncomfortably. "About the town, you know. That fight. Not joining in." "Heard something about it," said Bruce. "I went downtown again after that," said Sheen, "and met the same fellows who were fighting Linton and the others. They came for me, and I was getting awfully mauled when Joe Bevan turned up." "Oh, is Joe back again?" "Do you know him?" asked Sheen in surprise. "Oh, yes. I used to go to the Blue Boar to learn boxing from him all last summer holidays." "Did you really? Why, that's what I'm doing now." "Good man," said Bruce. "Isn't he a splendid teacher?" "Ripping." "But I didn't know you boxed, Bruce. You never went in for any of the school competitions." "I'm rather a rotten weight. 10-6. Too heavy for the lightweights and not heavy enough for the middles. Besides, the competitions here are really inter-house. They don't want day boys going in for them. Are you going to box for Seymour's?" "That's what I want to do. You see, it would be rather a score, wouldn't it? After what's happened, you know." "I suppose it would." "I should like to do something. It's not very pleasant," he added, with a forced laugh, "being considered a disgrace to the house, and cut by everyone." "Suppose not." "The difficulty is Drummond. You see, we are both the same weight, and he's much better than I am. I'm hoping that he'll go in for the middles, and let me take the light weights. There's nobody he couldn't beat in the middles, though he would be giving away a stone." "Have you asked him?" "Not yet. I want to keep it dark that I'm learning to box just at present." "Spring it on them suddenly?" "Yes. Of course, I can't let it get about that I go to Joe Bevan, because I have to break bounds every time I do it." "The upper river's out of bounds now for boarders, isn't it?" "Yes." Jack Bruce sat in silence for a while, his gaze concentrated on the road in front of him. "Why go by river at all?" he said at last. "If you like, I'll run you to the Blue Boar in the motor every day." "Oh, I say, that's awfully decent of you," said Sheen. "I should like to see old Joe again. I think I'll come and spar too. If you're learning, what you want more than anything is somebody your own size to box with." "That's just what Joe was saying. Will you really? I should be awfully glad if you would. Boxing with Joe is all right, but you feel all the time he's fooling with you. I should like to try how I got on with somebody else." "You'd better meet me here, then, as soon after school as you can." As he spoke, the car stopped. "Where are we?" asked Sheen. "Just at the corner of the road behind the houses." "Oh, I know. Hello, there goes the lock-up bell. I shall do it comfortably." He jumped down. "I say, Bruce," he said, "I really am most awfully obliged for the lift. Something went wrong with my boat, and I couldn't get back in it. I should have been frightfully in the cart if you hadn't come by." "That's all right," said Jack Bruce. "I say, Sheen." "Hello?" "Are you going to practice in the music room after morning school tomorrow?" "Yes, why?" "I think I'll turn up." "I wish you would." "What's that thing that goes like this? I forget most of it." He whistled a few bars. "That's a thing of Grieg's," said Sheen. "You might play it tomorrow," said Bruce. "Rather. Of course I will." "Thanks," said Jack Bruce. "Good night." He turned the car, and vanished down the road. From the sound, Sheen judged that he was once more travelling at a higher rate of speed than the local police would have approved. End of chapter 13. Chapter 14. A Skirmish. Upon consideration, Sheen determined to see Linton about that small matter of the boat without delay. After prayers that night he went to his study. "Can I speak to you for a minute, Linton?" he said. Linton was surprised. He disapproved of this intrusion. When a fellow is being cut by the house, he ought, by all the laws of school etiquette, to behave as such, and not speak till he is spoken to. "What do you want?" asked Linton. "I shan't keep you long. Do you think you could put away that book for a minute and listen?" Linton hesitated, then shut the book. "Hurry up, then," he said. "I was going to," said Sheen. "I simply came in to tell you that I know perfectly well who sunk my boat this afternoon." He felt at once that he had now got Linton's undivided attention. "Your boat?" said Linton. "You don't mean to say that was yours? What on earth were you doing at the place?" "I don't think that's any business of yours, is it, Linton?" "How did you get back?" "I don't think that's any business of yours either. I dare say you're disappointed, but I did manage to get back. In time for lock-up, too." "But I don't understand. Do you mean to say that that was your boat we took?" "Sunk," corrected Sheen. "Don't be a fool, Sheen. What the dickens should we want to sink your boat for? What happened was this. Albert—you remember Albert? Followed us up to the inn and smashed our boat while we were having tea. When we got out and found it sunk, we bagged the only other one we could see. We hadn't a notion it was yours. We thought it belonged to some fisherman chap." "Then you didn't sink my boat?" "Of course we didn't. What do you take us for?" "Sorry," said Sheen. "I thought it was a queer thing for you to have done. I'm glad it wasn't you. Good night." "But look here," said Linton. "Don't go. It must have landed you in a frightful hole, didn't it?" "A little, but it doesn't matter. Good night." "But half a second, Sheen." Sheen had disappeared. Linton sat on till lights were turned off, ruminating. He had a very tender conscience where other members of the school were concerned, though it was tougher as regarded masters, and he was full of remorse at the thought of how nearly he had got Sheen into trouble by borrowing his boat that afternoon. It seemed to him that it was his duty to make it up to him in some way. It was characteristic of Linton that the episode did not in any way alter his attitude towards Sheen. Another boy in a similar position might have been effusively friendly. Linton looked on the affair in a calm, judicial spirit. He had done Sheen a bad turn, but that was no reason why he should fling himself on his neck and swear eternal friendship. His demeanour on the occasions when they came in contact with each other remained the same. He did not speak to him, and he did not seem to see him. But all the while he was remembering that somehow or other he must do him a good turn of some sort, by way of levelling things up again. When that good turn had been done, he might dismiss him from his thoughts altogether. Sheen, for his part, made no attempt to trade on the matter of the boat. He seemed as little anxious to be friendly with Linton as Linton was to be friendly with him. For this Linton was grateful, and continued to keep his eyes open in the hope of finding some opportunity of squaring up matters between them. His chance was not long in coming. The feeling in the house against Sheen, caused by the story of his encounter with Adel, had not diminished. Stanning had fostered it in various little ways. It was not difficult. When a house of the standing in the school which Seymour's possessed exhibits a weak spot, the rest of the school do not require a great deal of encouragement to go on prodding that weak spot. In short, the school rotted Seymour's about Sheen, and Seymour's raged impotently. Fags of other houses expended much crude satire on Seymour's fags, and even the seniors of the house came in for their share of the baiting. Most of the houses at Wrykyn were jealous of Seymour's, and this struck them as an admirable opportunity of getting something of their own back. One afternoon, not long after Sheen's conversation with Linton, Stanning came into Seymour's senior day-room and sat down on the table. The senior day-room objected to members of other houses coming and sitting on their table, as if they had bought that rickety piece of furniture, but Stanning's reputation as a bruiser kept their resentment within bounds. "Hello, you chaps," said Stanning. The members of the senior day-room made no reply, but continued, as Mr. Kipling has it, to persecute their vocations. Most of them were brewing. They went on brewing with the earnest concentration of chefs. "You're a cheery lot," said Stanning, "but I don't wonder you've got the hump. I should be a bit sick if we'd got a skunk like that in our house. Heard the latest?" Some lunatic said, No, what? Thereby delivering the day-room bound into the hands of the enemy. Sheen's apologized to Attle. There was a sensation in the senior day-room, as Stanning had expected. He knew his men. He was perfectly aware that any story which centered round Sheen's cowardice would be believed by them, so he had not troubled to invent a lie which it would be difficult to disprove. He knew that in the present state of feeling in the house, Sheen would not be given a hearing. "No!" shouted the senior day-room. This was the last straw. The fellow seemed to go out of his way to lower the prestige of the house. "Fact," said Stanning. "I thought you knew." He continued to sit on the table, swinging his legs, while the full horror of his story sunk into the senior day-room mind. "I wonder you don't do something about it. Why don't you touch him up? He's not a prefect." But they were not prepared to go to that length. The senior day-room had a great respect both for Drummond's word and his skill with his hands. He had said he would slay anyone who touched Sheen, and they were of opinion that he would do it. "He isn't in," said one of the brewers, looking up from his toasting fork. "His study door was open when I passed." "I say, why not rag his study?" suggested another thickly, through a mouthful of toast. Stanning smiled. "Good idea," he said. It struck him that some small upheaval of Sheen's study furniture, coupled with the burning of one or two books, might check to some extent that student's work for the Gotford. And if Sheen could be stopped working for the Gotford, he, Stanning, would romp home. In the matter of brilliance there was no comparison between them. It was Sheen's painful habit of work which made him dangerous. Linton had been listening to this conversation in silence. He had come to the senior day-room to borrow a book. He now slipped out and made his way to Drummond's study. Drummond was in. Linton proceeded to business. "I say, Drummond." "Hullo?" "That man Stanning has come in. He's getting the senior day-room to rag Sheen's study." "What?" Linton repeated his statement. "Does the man think he owns the house?" said Drummond. "Where is he?" "Coming up now. I hear them." "What are you going to do? Stop them?" "What do you think? Of course I am. I'm not going to have any of Appleby's crew coming into Seymour's and ragging studies." "This ought to be worth seeing," said Linton. "Look on me as Charles, his friend. I'll help if you want me, but it's your scene." Drummond opened his door just as Stanning and his myrmidons were passing it. "Hello, Stanning," he said. Stanning turned. The punitive expedition stopped. "Do you want anything?" inquired Drummond politely. The members of the senior day-room who were with Stanning rallied round, silent and interested. This dramatic situation appealed to them. They had a passion for rows, and this looked distinctly promising. There was a pause. Stanning looked carefully at Drummond. Drummond looked carefully at Stanning. "I was going to see Sheen," said Stanning at length. "He isn't in." "Oh!" Another pause. "Was it anything special?" inquired Drummond pleasantly. The expedition edged a little forward. "Oh, no, nothing special," said Stanning. The expedition looked disappointed. "Any message I can give him?" asked Drummond. "No, thanks," said Stanning. "Sure?" "Quite, thanks." "I don't think it's worth while your waiting. He may not be in for some time." "No, perhaps not. Thanks. So long." "So long." Stanning turned on his heel and walked away down the passage. Drummond went back into his study and shut the door. The expedition, deprived of its commander-in-chief, paused irresolutely outside. Then it followed its leader's example. There was peace in the passage. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15. The Rout at Ripton. On the Saturday following this episode, the first 15 traveled to Ripton to play the return match with that school on its own ground. Of the two Ripton matches, the one played at Wrykyn was always the big event of the football year, but the other came next in importance, and the telegram which was dispatched to the school shop at the close of the game was always awaited with anxiety. This year Wrykyn looked forward to the return match with a certain amount of apathy, due partly to the fact that the school was in a slack, unpatriotic state, and partly to the hammering the team had received in the previous term, when the Ripton centre three-quarters had run through and scored with monotonous regularity. "We're bound to get sat on," was the general verdict of the school. Allardyce, while thoroughly agreeing with this opinion, did his best to conceal the fact from the rest of the team. He had certainly done his duty by them. Every day for the past fortnight the forwards and outsides had turned out to run and pass, and on the Saturdays there had been matches with Corpus, Oxford, and the Cambridge Old Wrykinians. In both games the school had been beaten. In fact, it seemed as if they could only perform really well when they had no opponents. To see the three-quarters racing down the field, at practice, and scoring innumerable imaginary tries, one was apt to be misled and to consider them a fine quartet. But when there was a match, all the beautiful dash and precision of the passing faded away, and the last thing they did was to run straight. Barry was the only one of the four who played the game properly. But, as regarded condition, there was nothing wrong with the team. Even Trevor could not have made them train harder, and Allardyce in his more sanguine moments had a shadowy hope that the Ripton score might, with care, be kept in the teens. Barry had bought a Sportsman at the station, and he unfolded it as the train began to move. Searching the left-hand column of the middle page, as we all do when we buy the Sportsman on Saturday, to see how our names look in print, and what sort of a team the enemy has got, he made a remarkable discovery. At the same moment Drummond, on the other side of the carriage, did the same. "I say," he said, "they must have had a big clear-out at Ripton. Have you seen the team they've got out today?" "I was just looking at it," said Barry. "What's up with it?" inquired Allardyce. "Let's have a look." "They've only got about half their proper team. They've got a different back. Gray isn't playing." "Both their centres are, though," said Drummond. "More fun for us, Drum, old chap," said Attell. "I'm going home again. Stop the train." Drummond said nothing. He hated Attell most when he tried to be facetious. "Dunn isn't playing, nor is Waite," said Barry, "so they haven't got either of their proper halves. I say, we might have a chance of doing something today." "Of course we shall," said Allardyce. "You've only got to buck up, and we've got them on toast." The atmosphere in the carriage became charged with optimism. It seemed a simple thing to defeat a side which was practically a Ripton A team. The centre three-quarters were there still, it was true, but Allardyce and Drummond ought to be able to prevent the halves ever getting the ball out to them. The team looked on those two unknown halves as timid novices who would lose their heads at the kick-off. As a matter of fact, the system of football teaching at Ripton was so perfect, and the keenness so great, that the second 15 was nearly as good as the first every year. But the Wrykyn team did not know this, with the exception of Allardyce, who kept his knowledge to himself, and they arrived at Ripton jaunty and confident. Keith, the Ripton captain, who was one of the center three-quarters who had made so many holes in the Wrykyn defense in the previous term, met the team at the station, and walked up to the school with them, carrying Allardyce's bag. "You seem to have lost a good many men at Christmas," said Allardyce. "We were reading the Sportsman in the train. Apparently you've only got 10 of your last term's lot. Have they all left?" The Ripton captain grinned ruefully. "Not much," he replied. "They're all here, all except Dunn. You remember Dunn? Little, thick-set chap who played half. He always had his hair quite tidy and parted exactly in the middle all through the game." "Oh, yes, I remember Dunn. What's he doing now?" "Gone to Cooper's Hill." "Rot! His not going to the Varsity. He'd have walked into his blue." Allardyce agreed. He had marked Dunn in the match of the previous term, and that immaculate sportsman had made things not a little warm for him. "Where are all the others, then?" he asked. "Where's that other half of yours? And the rest of the forwards?" "Mumps," said Keith. "What?" "It's a fact. Rot, isn't it? We've had a regular bout of it. 20 fellows got it all together. Naturally, 4 of those were in the team. That's the way things happen. I only wonder the whole scrum didn't have it." "What beastly luck," said Allardyce. "We had measles like that a couple of years ago in the summer term, and had to play the Incogs and Zingari with a sort of second 11. We got mopped." "That's what we shall get this afternoon, I'm afraid," said Keith. "Oh, no," said Allardyce. "Of course you won't." And, as events turned out, that was one of the truest remarks he had ever made in his life. One of the drawbacks to playing Ripton on its own ground was the crowd. Another was the fact that one generally got beaten. But your sportsman can put up with defeat. What he does not like is a crowd that regards him as a subtle blend of incompetent idiot and malicious scoundrel, and says so very loud and clear. It was not, of course, the school that did this. They spent their time blushing for the shouters. It was the patriotic inhabitants of Ripton town who made the school wish that they could be saved from their friends. The football ground at Ripton was at the edge of the school fields, separated from the road by narrow iron railings, and along these railings the choicest spirits of the town would line up, and smoke and yell, and spit and yell again. As Wordsworth wrote, "There are 2 voices." They were on something like the following lines. Inside the railings, "School! Buck up, school! Get it out, school!" Outside the railings, "Gow it, Ripton! That's the way, Ripton! Twist his good old English adjective neck, Ripton! Sit on his forcibly described head, Ripton! Gow it, Ripton! Ho, 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 ho! They ain't no use, Ripton! Kick 'em in the eye, Ripton! Ho, 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 ho!" The bursts of merriment signalized the violent downfall of some dangerous opponent. The school loathed these humble supporters, and occasionally fastidious juniors would go the length of throwing chunks of mud at them through the railings, but nothing discouraged them or abated their fervid desire to see the school win. Every year they seemed to increase in zeal, and they were always in great form at the Wrykyn match. It would be charitable to ascribe to this reason the gruesome happenings of that afternoon. They needed some explaining away. Allardyce won the toss, and chose to start downhill, with the wind in his favour. It is always best to get these advantages at the beginning of the game. If one starts against the wind, it usually changes ends at half-time. Amidst a roar from both touch-lines and a volley of howls from the road, a Ripton forward kicked off. The ball flew in the direction of Stanning on the right wing. A storm of laughter arose from the road as he dropped it. The first scrum was formed on the Wrykyn 25 line. The Ripton forwards got the ball and heeled with their usual neatness. The Ripton half, who was taking the scrum, gathered it cleanly and passed to his colleague. He was a sturdy youth with a dark, rather forbidding face, in which the acute observer might have read signs of the savage. He was of the breed which is vaguely described at public schools as "nigger," a term covering every variety of shade from ebony to light lemon. As a matter of fact, he was a half-caste, sent home to England to be educated. Drummond recognized him as he dived forward to tackle him. The last place where they had met had been the roped ring at Aldershot. It was his opponent in the final of the Feathers. He reached him as he swerved, and they fell together. The ball bounded forward. "Hello, Potero," he said. "Thought you'd left." The other grinned recognition. "Hello, Drummond." "Going up to Aldershot this year?" "Yes, lightweight." "So am I." The scrum had formed by now, and further conversation was impossible. Drummond looked a little thoughtful as they put the ball in. He had been told that Potero was leaving Ripton at Christmas. It was a nuisance his being still at school. Drummond was not afraid of him. He would have fought a champion of the world if the school had expected him to, but he could not help remembering that it was only by the very narrowest margin, and after a terrific 3 rounds, that he had beaten him in the Feathers the year before. It would be too awful for words if the decision were to be reversed in the coming competition. But he was not allowed much leisure for pondering on the future. The present was too full of incident and excitement. The withdrawal of the 4 invalids and the departure of Dunn had not reduced the Ripton team to that wreck of its former self which the Wrykyn 15 had looked for. On the contrary, their play seemed, if anything, a shade better than it had been in the former match. There was all the old aggressiveness, and Potero and his partner, so far from being timid novices and losing their heads, eclipsed the exhibition given at Wrykyn by Waite and Dunn. Play had only been in progress 6 minutes when Keith, taking a pass on the 25 line, slipped past Adel, round the back, and scored between the posts. 3 minutes later the other Ripton centre scored. At the end of 20 minutes the Wrykyn line had been crossed 5 times, and each of the tries had been converted. "Can't you fellows get that ball in the scrum?" demanded Allardyce plaintively, as the team began for the 5th time the old familiar walk to the halfway line. "Pack tight and get the first shove." The result of this address was to increase the Ripton lead by 4 points. In his anxiety to get the ball, one of the Wrykyn forwards started heeling before it was in, and the referee promptly gave a free kick to Ripton for foot up. As this event took place within easy reach of the Wrykyn goal, and immediately in front of the same, Keith had no difficulty in bringing off the penalty. By half-time the crowd in the road, hoarse with laughter, had exhausted all their adjectives and were repeating themselves. The Ripton score was 6 goals, a penalty goal, and 2 tries to 0, and the Wrykyn team was a demoralized rabble. The fact that the rate of scoring slackened somewhat after the interval may be attributed to the disinclination of the Riptonians to exert themselves unduly. They ceased playing in the stern and scientific spirit in which they had started, and, instead of adhering to an orthodox game, began to enjoy themselves. The forwards no longer heeled like a machine. They broke through ambitiously and tried to score on their own account. When the outsides got as far as the back, they did not pass. They tried to drop goals. In this way only 22 points were scored after half-time. Allardyce and Drummond battled on nobly, but with their pack hopelessly outclassed, it was impossible for them to do anything of material use. Barry, on the wing, tackled his man whenever the latter got the ball, but as a rule the centers did not pass, but attacked by themselves. At last, by way of a fitting conclusion to the rout, the Ripton back, catching a high punt, ran instead of kicking, and to the huge delight of the town contingent, scored. With this incident the visiting team drained the last dregs of the bitter cup. Humiliation could go no further. Almost immediately afterwards the referee blew his whistle for no side. "3 cheers for Wrykyn," said Keith. To the 15 victims, it sounded ironical. End of chapter 15. Chapter 16. Drummond Goes into Retirement. The return journey of a school team after a crushing defeat in a foreign match is never a very exhilarating business. Those members of the side who have not yet received their colors are wondering which of them is to be sacrificed to popular indignation and chucked. The rest, who have managed to get their caps, are feeling that even now 2/3 of the school will be saying that they are not worth a place in the third 15, while the captain, brooding apart, is becoming soured at the thought that posterity will forget what little good he may have done, and remember only that it was in his year that the school got so many points taken off them by so-and-so. Conversation does not ripple and sparkle during these homecomings. The Wrykyn team made the journey in almost unbroken silence. They were all stiff and sore, and their feelings were such as to unfit them for talking to people. The school took the thing very philosophically. A bad sign. When a school is in a healthy, normal condition, it should be stirred up by a bad defeat by another school, like a disturbed wasp's nest. Wrykyn made 1 or 2 remarks about people who could not play footer for toffee, and then let the thing drop. Sheen was too busy with his work and his boxing to have much leisure for mourning over this latest example of the present inefficiency of the school. The examination for the Gotford was to come off in 2 days, and the inter-house boxing was fixed for the following Wednesday. In 5 days, therefore, he would get his chance of retrieving his lost place in the school. He was certain that he could, at any rate, make a very good show against anyone in the school, even Drummond. Joe Bevan was delighted with his progress, and quoted Shakespeare volubly in his admiration. Jack Bruce and Francis added their tribute, and the knife and boot boy paid him the neatest compliment of all by refusing point-blank to have any more dealings with him whatsoever. His professional duties, explained the knife and boot boy, did not include being punched in the heye by blokes, and he did not intend to be put upon. "You'll do all right," said Jack Bruce as they were motoring home, "if they'll let you go in for it all. But how do you know they will? Haven't they chosen the men yet?" "Not yet. They don't do it till the day before. But there won't be any difficulty about that. Drummond will let me have a shot if he thinks I'm good enough." "Oh, you're good enough," said Bruce. And when, on Monday evening, Francis, on receipt of no fewer than 4 blows in a single round, a record, shook him by the hand and said that ever he happened to want a little dog that was a perfect bag of tricks and had got a pedigree, mind you, he, Francis, would be proud to supply that animal, Sheen felt that the moment had come to approach Drummond on the subject of the house boxing. It would be a little awkward at first, and conversation would probably run somewhat stiffly, but all would be well once he had explained himself. But things had been happening in his absence which complicated the situation. Allardyce was having tea with Drummond, who had been stopping in with a sore throat. He had come principally to make arrangements for the match between his house and Seymour's in the semi-final round of the competition. "You're looking bad," he said, taking a seat. "I'm feeling bad," said Drummond. For the past few days he had been very much out of sorts. He put it down to a chill caught after the Ripton match. He had never mustered up sufficient courage to sponge himself with cold water after soaking in a hot bath, and he occasionally suffered for it. "What's up?" inquired Allardyce. "Oh, I don't know. Sort of beastly feeling. Sore throat? Nothing much. Only it makes you feel rather rotten." Allardyce looked interested. "I say," he said, "it looks as if... I wonder... I hope you haven't." "What?" "Mumps. It sounds jolly like it." "Mumps! Of course I've not. Why should I?" Allardyce produced a letter from his pocket. "I got this from Keith, the Ripton captain, this morning. You know they've had a lot of the thing there." "Oh, didn't you? That was why they had such a bad team out." "Bad team," murmured Drummond. "Well, I mean not their best team. They had 4 of their men down with mumps. Here's what Keith said. Listen. Bit about hoping we got back all right, and so on, first. Then he says, here it is, another of our fellows has got the mumps. One of the forwards, rather a long man who was good out of touch. He developed it a couple of days after the match. It's lucky that all our card games are over. We beat John's, Oxford, last Wednesday, and that finished the card. But it'll rather rot up the house matches. We should have walked the cup, but there's no knowing what will happen now. I hope none of your lot caught the mumps from Browning during the game. It's quite likely, of course. Browning ought not to have been playing, but I had no notion that there was anything wrong with him. He never said he felt bad." "You've got it, Drummond. That's what's the matter with you." "Oh, rot!" said Drummond. "It's only a chill." But the school doctor, who had looked in at the house to dose a small Seymourite who had indulged too heartily in the pleasures of the table, had other views, and before lock-up Drummond was hurried off to the infirmary. Sheen went to Drummond's study after preparation had begun, and was surprised to find him out. Not being on speaking terms with a single member of the house, he was always out of date as regarded items of school news. As a rule he had to wait until Jack Bruce told him before learning of any occurrence of interest. He had no notion that mumps was the cause of Drummond's absence, and he sat and waited patiently for him in his study till the bell rang for prayers. The only possible explanation that occurred to him was that Drummond was in somebody else's study, and he could not put his theory to the test by going and looking. It was only when Drummond did not put in an appearance at prayers that Sheen began to suspect that something might have happened. It was maddening not to be able to make inquiries. He had almost decided to go and ask Linton, and risk whatever might be the consequences of such a step, when he remembered that the matron must know. He went to her, and was told that Drummond was in the infirmary. He could not help seeing that this made his position a great deal more difficult. In 10 minutes he could have explained matters to Drummond if he had found him in his study, but it would be a more difficult task to put the thing clearly in a letter. Meanwhile it was bedtime, and he soon found his hands too full with his dormitory to enable him to think out the phrasing of that letter. The dormitory, which was recruited entirely from the junior day-room, had heard of Drummond's departure with rejoicings. They liked Drummond, but he was a good deal too fond of the iron hand for their tastes. A night with Sheen in charge should prove a welcome change. A deafening uproar was going on when Sheen arrived, and as he came into the room somebody turned the gas out. He found some matches on the chest of drawers, and lit it again just in time to see a sportive youth tearing the clothes off his bed and piling them on the floor. A month before he would not have known how to grapple with such a situation, but his evenings with Joe Bevan had given him the habit of making up his mind and acting rapidly. Drummond was wont to keep a swagger stick by his bedside for the better observance of law and order. Sheen possessed himself of this swagger stick, and reasoned with the sportive youth. The rest of the dormitory looked on in interested silence. It was a critical moment, and on his handling of it depended Sheen's victory or defeat. If he did not keep his head, he was lost. A dormitory is merciless to a prefect whose weakness they have discovered. Sheen kept his head. In a quiet, pleasant voice, fingering the swagger stick as he spoke, in an absent manner, he requested his young friend to remake the bed, rapidly and completely. For the space of 5 minutes no sound broke the silence except the rustle of sheets and blankets. At the end of that period the bed looked as good as new. "Thanks," said Sheen gratefully. "That's very kind of you." He turned to the rest of the dormitory. "Don't let me detain you," he said politely. "Get into bed as soon as you like." The dormitory got into bed sooner than they liked. For some reason the colossal rag they had planned had fizzled out. They were thoughtful as they crept between the sheets. Could these things be? After much deliberation, Sheen sent his letter to Drummond on the following day. It was not a long letter, but it was carefully worded. It explained that he had taken up boxing of late, and ended with a request that he might be allowed to act as Drummond's understudy in the house competitions. It was late that evening when the infirmary attendant came over with the answer. Like the original letter, the answer was brief. "Dear Sheen," wrote Drummond, "thanks for the offer. I am afraid I can't accept it. We must have the best man. Linton is going to box for the house in the light weights." End of chapter 16. Chapter 17. Seymour's One Success. This polite epistle, it may be mentioned, was a revised version of the one which Drummond originally wrote in reply to Sheen's request. His first impulse had been to answer in the 4 brief words, "Don't be a fool," for Sheen's letter had struck him as nothing more than a contemptible piece of posing, and he had all the hatred for poses which is a characteristic of the plain and straightforward type of mind. It seemed to him that Sheen, as he expressed it to himself, was trying to "do the boy hero." In the school library, which had been stocked during the Dark Ages, when that type of story was popular, there were numerous school stories in which the hero retrieved a rocky reputation by thrashing the bully, displaying in the encounter an intuitive but overwhelming skill with his fists. Drummond could not help feeling that Sheen must have been reading one of those stories. It was all very fine and noble of him to want to show that he was no coward after all, like Leo Cholmondeley, or whatever his beastly name was, in the Lads of St. Ethelberta's, or some such piffling book. But, thought Drummond in his cold, practical way, what about the house? If Sheen thought that Seymour's was going to chuck away all chance of winning one of the inter-house events, simply in order to give him an opportunity of doing the young hero, the sooner he got rid of that sort of idea, the better. If he wanted to do the Leo Cholmondeley business, let him go and chuck a kid into the river and jump in and save him. But he wasn't going to have the house let in for 20 Sheens. Such were the meditations of Drummond when the infirmary attendant brought Sheen's letter to him, and he seized pencil and paper and wrote, "Don't be a fool." But pity succeeded contempt, and he tore up the writing. After all, however much he had deserved it, the man had had a bad time. It was no use jumping on him, and at one time they had been pals. Might as well do the thing politely. All of which reflections would have been prevented Had Sheen thought of mentioning the simple fact that it was Joe Bevan who had given him the lessons to which he referred in his letter? But he had decided not to do so, wishing to avoid long explanations. And there was, he felt, a chance that the letter might come into other hands than those of Drummond. So he had preserved silence on that point, thereby wrecking his entire scheme. It struck him that he might go to Linton, explain his position, and ask him to withdraw in his favour, but there were difficulties in the way of that course. There is a great deal of red tape about the athletic arrangements of a house at a public school. When once an order has gone forth, it is difficult to get it repealed. Linton had been chosen to represent the house and the light weights, and he would carry out orders. Only illness would prevent him appearing in the ring. Sheen made up his mind not to try to take his place, and went through the days a victim to gloom, which was caused by other things besides his disappointment respecting the boxing competition. The Gotford examination was over now, and he was not satisfied with his performance. Though he did not know it, his dissatisfaction was due principally to the fact that, owing to his isolation, he had been unable to compare notes after the examinations with the others. Doing an examination without comparing notes subsequently with one's rivals is like playing golf against a bogey. The imaginary rival against whom one pits oneself never makes a mistake. Our own howlers stand out in all their horrid nakedness, but we do not realize that our rivals have probably made others far worse. In this way Sheen plumbed the depths of depression. The Gotford was a purely classical examination, with the exception of one paper, a general knowledge paper, and it was in this that Sheen fancied he had failed so miserably. His Greek and Latin verse were always good. His prose, he felt, was not altogether beyond the pale, but in the general knowledge paper he had come down heavily. As a matter of fact, if he had only known, the paper was an exceptionally hard one, and there was not a single candidate for the scholarship who felt satisfied with his treatment of it. It was to questions 10, 11, and 13 of this paper that Cardew, of the schoolhouse, who had entered for the scholarship for the sole reason that competitors got excused 2 clear days of ordinary schoolwork, wrote the following answer: See Encyclopaedia Britannica, Times edition. If they really wanted to know, he said subsequently, that was the authority to go to. He himself would probably misinform them altogether. In addition to the Gotford and the house boxing, the house fives now came on, and the authorities of Seymour's were in no small perplexity. They met together in Rigby's study to discuss the matter. Their difficulty was this: there was only one inmate of Seymour's who had a chance of carrying off the House Fives Cup, and that was Sheen. The House was asking itself what was to be done about it. "You see," said Rigby, "you can look at it in 2 ways, whichever you like. We ought certainly to send in our best man for the pot, whatever sort of chap he is. But then, come to think of it, Sheen can't very well be said to belong to the house at all. When a man's been cut dead during the whole term, he can't be looked on as one of the house very well. See what I mean?" "Of course he can't," said Mill, who was second in command at Seymour's. Mills's attitude toward his fellow men was one of incessant hostility. He seemed to bear a grudge against the entire race. Rigby resumed. He was a pacific person, and hated anything resembling rows in the house. He had been sorry for Sheen, and would have been glad to give him a chance of setting himself on his legs again. "You see," he said, "this is what I mean. We either recognize Sheen's existence or we don't. Follow? We can't get him to win this cup for us, and then, when he has done it, go on cutting him and treating him as if he didn't belong to the house at all. I know he let the house down awfully badly in that business, But still, if he lifts the 5 cup, that'll square the thing. If he does anything to give the house a leg up, he must be treated as if he'd never let it down at all." "Of course," said Barry. "I vote we send him in for the 5s." "What rot!" said Mill. "It isn't as if none of the rest of us played 5s." "We aren't as good as Sheen," said Barry. "I don't care. I call it rot, letting a chap like him represent the house at anything. If he were the best 5s player in the world, I wouldn't let him play for the house." Rigby was impressed by his vehemence. He hesitated. "After all, Barry," he said, "I don't know. Perhaps it might. You see, he did, well, I really think we'd better have somebody else. The house has got its knife into Sheen too much just at present to want him as a representative. There'd only be sickness, don't you think? Who else is there?" So it came about that Menzies was chosen to uphold the house in the 5s courts. Sheen was not surprised. But it was not pleasant. He was certainly having bad luck in his attempts to do something for the house. Perhaps if he won the Gotford they might show a little enthusiasm. The Gotford always caused a good deal of interest in the school. It was the best thing of its kind in existence at Wrykyn, and even the most abandoned loafers liked to feel that their house had won it. It was just possible, thought Sheen, that a brilliant win might change the feelings of Seymour's towards him. He did not care for the applause of the multitude more than a boy should, but he preferred it very decidedly to the cut direct. Things went badly for Seymour's. Never in the history of the house, or at any rate in the comparatively recent history of the house, had there been such a slump in athletic trophies. To begin with, they were soundly beaten in the semi-final for the House Football Cup by Allardyce's lot. With Drummond away, there was none to mark the captain of the school team at half, and Allardyce had raced through in a manner that must have compensated him to a certain extent for the poor time he had had in first 15 matches. The game had ended in a Seymourite defeat by 19 points to 5. Nor had the boxing left the house in a better position. Linton fought pluckily in the lightweights, but went down before Stanning, after beating a representative of Templars. Mill did not show up well in the heavyweights, and was defeated in his first bout. Seymour's were reduced to telling themselves how different it all would have been if Drummond had been there. Sheen watched the lightweight contests, and nearly danced with irritation. He felt that he could have eaten Stanning. The man was quick with his left, but he couldn't box. He hadn't a notion of sidestepping, and the uppercut appeared to be entirely outside his range. He would like to see him tackle Francis. Sheen thought bitterly of Drummond. Why on earth couldn't he have given him a chance? It was maddening. The 5s carried on the story. Menzies was swamped by a Day's man. He might just as well have stayed away altogether. The star of Seymour's was very low on the horizon. And then the house scored its one success. The headmaster announced it in the hall after prayers in his dry, unemotional way. "I have received the list of marks," he said, "from the examiners for the Gotford Scholarship." He paused. Sheen felt a sudden calm triumph flood over him. Somehow, intuitively, he knew that he had won. He waited without excitement for the next words. "Out of a possible 1,000 marks, Sheen, who wins the scholarship, obtained 701, Stanning 604, Wilson—" Sheen walked out of the hall in the unique position of a Gotford winner with only one friend to congratulate him. Jack Bruce was the one. The other 633 members of the school made no demonstration. There was a pleasant custom at Seymour's of applauding at tea any Seymourite who had won distinction, and so shed a reflected glory on the house. The head of the house would observe, "Well played, so-and-so," and the rest of the house would express their emotion in the way that seemed best to them, to the subsequent exultation of the local crockery merchant, who had generally to supply at least a dozen fresh cups and plates to the house after one of these occasions. When it was for getting his first 11 or first 15 cap that the lucky man was being cheered, the total of breakages sometimes ran into the 20s. Rigby, good, easy man, was a little doubtful as to what course to pursue in the circumstances. Should he give the signal? After all, the fellow had won the Gotford. It was a score for the house, and they wanted all the scores they could get in these lean years. Perhaps then he had better. "Well played, Sheen," said he. There was a dead silence. A giggle from the fags' table showed that the comedy of the situation was not lost on the young mind. The head of the house looked troubled. This was awfully awkward. "Well played, Sheen," he said again. "Don't mention it, Rigby," said the winner of the Gotford politely, looking up from his plate. End of chapter 17.